You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and thanks so much for coming back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis, where we speak with people who have been or want to be hikers, most often on the Appalachian Trail. This week we have another couple, Darrell and Alicia Brimberry, with their story of how they had entirely different experiences on their adventure in 2018. The Brimberrys will be along soon. Two other guests, seems like it's couples week, are Greg and Jen Seymour, friends of the show and better known to many of you as Chica and Sunsets. These two lovely people have a new venture and I thought I'd give them some free publicity about it. It's always nice to talk with them, so Greg and Jen will be along after the Brimberrys. Now, do you recall that I used to read out podcast reviews in the past? I stopped doing that. But I wanted to actually respond to one today. It's another 5-star review, by the way, but the reviewer makes an interesting point that I wanted to answer. Lastly, we have the 10th chapter of Paul Stutzman's Hiking Thru. This has been a great success with many of you, and I think it is because Paul raises so many issues about death, coping with death, and faith, as well as his great descriptions of his hike. Paul's story, as always, will be on at the end. So first of all, let's hear from the Brimberrys. Okay, we've got another couple on the show this week. This is Darrell and Alicia Brimberry. Next Step and Which Way. Hi guys, how are you?
Hey, we're great.
Awesome.
Good. Now, you guys reached out to me recently to talk about what started as a joint through hike in 2018, I believe it was. And I understand that you retired from the Army after 30 years, Darrell. What made you want to spend your hard-earned retirement out in the woods and climbing mountains? What was that all about?
Yeah, it's kind of nuts, because you spend a lot of time in the field in the Army and stuff, especially in my younger days in the Army. We had to do it then. So this wasn't something I had to do other than the fact that it really got inside of me and then I had to do it. But, it's just something about the trail and read books over the years and it just kind of gets in you. And it's just something I really, really wanted to do. I felt like it was a great timing just right after I retired and to be able to do that and to be able to, and even better to be able to do it with Alicia. That was just an awesome opportunity, an opportunity to kind of walk it off for from the military. My trail name is Next Step, so it was kind of the next natural step for me. So that's part of how I got that name. And plus, I'm kind of just a planner. I can't help myself. I'm the guy that did a simulated hike the year before when I started, on the 24th of February, and every day the AWOL got out and kind of said, okay, today we're going to hike 8 miles from Springer Mountain to Hawk Mountain.
Really?
Yeah. And now we didn't stick by that once we got on it, but, and I wanted to kind of get away from that person actually. And over time, the trail did that for me. But yeah, it just, when I was in Ranger school back in 1989 in the North Georgia mountains, and we do some training right along the AT there. You might have read about it or even experienced it. So there's some books
I
that
did.
write about it.
Yeah.
So at any rate, and I saw it and somebody said, hey, that's the Appalachian Trail. And I guess a couple years later, I read a book and then it just, from there, it was just in my gut and I couldn't get it out. So
I think the books tend to give you a story and you think, well, once you've read that whole story, you think, well, that's it. I know what happens. Then you read another book, and it's an entirely different journey, isn't it? So you all have a different journey, which is why I think actually one of the reasons this show still seems to be quite popular with people, because everybody has their own story to tell. And so, really, why on earth did you want to go with him, Alicia? Was this your ambition as well, or did you just want to support his ambition?
It didn't start out that way. It was always his dream. And then about 15 years ago, I went on a 5-day backpacking trip, the longest I'd ever gone. And actually my first real backpacking trip. And it just kind of like, when I did that trip, it was like, wow, that was really felt like an accomplishment. And so the more we hiked and we would do some, trips to get us ready for the Appalachian Trail, I was like, I'm going to do this too. It's something I want to experience. To walk from Georgia to Maine just sounded like something that was just a great challenge.
So originally it wasn't your ambition. You weren't actually going to do it with him, or you knew he was going to do it.
Right.
So there was a transition when you started doing these walks. You thought, well, I can do this as well.
About 5 years ago, that's when I started
Right.
to get the dream myself.
So what did you think about, I mean, you must have had in your mind, Darrell, that you were going to do it yourself, I presume, originally. So how did that change your mindset when Alicia wanted to do it as well?
It changed it completely. I had set out originally, it was my go. She was totally supportive. But, I wanted her to, in my back of my mind, to do it with me.
All right.
But I knew she had to come to it on her own. And even once she said she wanted to do it, I was like, because I was nudging her along the way a little bit. Because we do almost everything together, especially our recreational things. We do them together. It's just part of our marriage and who we are. And when she finally said yes, and I was like, oh, honey, do you know what you're really getting into? So I was throwing her some books, Appalachian Trials and stuff. You really need to read this. And, because I kind of had a pretty good idea what I was getting into, but I didn't know fully if she just kind of was just, the romantic, glamorous part of it and what's on the brochure, and didn't really recognize, all the ups and downs literally and figuratively on the trail. But I tell you, Steve, I had done a few things in life that were kind of difficult, Ranger school, airborne
Sure.
school, ran a few marathons. So I'd had that feeling of kind of accomplishing something kind of at the end. Alicia's done a lot, but never anything like physical like that. So as much as I had this vision of me always at the end of the hike on Katahdin with my pose in the air, and that kind of drove me. The thought of her being next to me doing that same thing, I was more joyful about what her experience was going to be in that than I was my own. So, and to be able to do it together was drove me even further to get this done. So
That's actually, was going to be one of my later questions, but I'm going to go ahead to it now, actually, because so what were those early weeks like together? Because it must be a very interesting dynamic to go from what I presume is a career that often keeps couples apart to spending 24/7 in each other's faces. Did you cope with that okay, or was that different to what you imagined it would be?
Well, I was never worried about it because I'd spend every moment with her if I could. I was worried about how she would take it because she needs her own space, and I'll let her speak to that. But I think we transitioned pretty well. We had done some prepping. We were in the DC for my last duty station, so we got up to the Shenandoah National Park a lot, and there's hundreds of miles of trails through there. Other than the AT, the AT is probably the easiest trail that goes through there. So we've done some pretty big hikes, 2 and 3 days together. And she mentioned the one longer hike we got to do. But we probably did over a dozen little mini backpacking trips. So we kind of got our routine down. So we kind of knew what that was going to look like already. And I'll let you jump in, Alicia.
Yeah, but before you do that, Alicia, but short backpacking trips are entirely different to what 6 months or 5 months on the AT is like. There must be a different mindset, or you grow into a different mindset, don't you? Or did you feel it was something you got into as a couple straight away?
I think that it really only took us, I think within a couple of weeks, that was like our new normal. And I absolutely loved it. I really, really did. It was just, I looked forward to every night to get to camp. And, now a lot of times we were not hiking together, all the time. Darrell is very social, and there's not one person that can walk by that he can't not talk to. And I had a mission. I'm more mission, like I have got to get so many miles today. So
You
hello,
would have thought
nice.
the ranger would have been the mission man, wouldn't you,
Exactly.
really?
It's like, nice to meet you, but I've got to go. And I would just
Yeah.
keep hiking, and then he would catch up with me. So we did have a lot of time, by ourselves, but I absolutely loved it. I really, really did.
Well,
That's
my own
cool.
game became to kind of catch the rabbit. She'd get out in front of me and I try to reel her in. And then sometimes when we were going to town or something that day, it took longer than I thought because she had kicked it into high gear by then. And I was like, oh, did she take a wrong turn? Her name is Which Way, by the way, because she's a little
Yeah.
bit directionally challenged. She would say that. And so she fell upon that pretty easy. And I was, sometimes it'd be, 10 minutes before I caught her. Sometimes it'd be an hour and a half, and I was like, man, I don't think I stopped that long.
Did you get lost, Alicia?
No, I never did.
All right. All right.
I never took the wrong turn, but because of my name, I'm very, very focused on making sure I'm on the right path. So
All right.
In full disclosure, I did take the wrong turn, at least. She almost did a couple of times, but I would just watch her and she'd look over her shoulder and I kind of just nod my head this way. She'd go, oh, okay, yeah.
It's funny, actually. I having done the trail this year myself, I'd forgotten how quite easy it is to get lost. I mean, I know it should be easy enough to stay on track, but there are a few times I did take the slightly wrong turn. You find it out pretty quickly, but you have to kind of pay attention, don't you? Because normally you're walking along looking at your feet, and you might pass a double blaze, and suddenly one goes one way and you go the other way. And I did that
Exactly, and
several
every
times.
once in a while every once in a while, if I was out on my own and I felt like I'm just not real sure, I would always get my gut hook out and just make sure that I was on the trail, so
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, when we were in the Smokies during that big snowstorm, there were some times you didn't see blazes. There's not a lot of blazes in the Smokies anyway, and
No, you're right.
usually you could just tell where the trail's at. And when it was 2 feet of snow on that, it was like there was a couple moments where it was like, okay, are we on track here? So, but fortunately with modern technology, I could just kind of pull the gut hook out and hit the GPS and go, okay, the blue dot's on the trail, so I'm good.
That is a definite bonus. The fact that you can get lost on gut hooks and incredibly quickly, it knows exactly how wrong you've gone, doesn't it? So you can find yourself on the trail and just walk in a general direction, you will hit the trail again. So that was a very reassuring thing. And you started in February, as I did this year. What was your thinking on this? Was that something just because you got out of the army and you wanted to get straight to it, or
No,
you thought February would be a good time to start?
there were a few things that kind of led into that, and originally we thought about even starting a little earlier. My birthday's actually February 11th, and originally I
All right.
thought I was going to get out on the 50th birthday, so we thought about starting then and having to go to finish on August the 8th, which was our 30th anniversary would have been then, I think it was. So
All right, cool.
25th back at the time. But anyway, that didn't work out. So we ended up with August 24th. It was all driven by retirement, or February 24th, all driven by retirement date. But a couple things. I wanted to get out, first of all, ahead of the big bubble, so we could kind of let the hike just kind of come to us and ease into it. We kind of scripted out the first 10 days because I wanted to make sure we didn't overhike it. So,
Right.
and a couple of other things, kind of in marathon, and they say you can't win the race in the first mile, but you can lose the race in the first mile. So I looked
Definitely.
at the same thing on, get to Katahdin. I didn't want to let our adrenaline kind of make us, because we were capable of hiking, 12, 14 miles a day, but we wanted to kind of start off easy and let it come to us. So I wanted to get ahead of the crowd a little bit, so that we wouldn't get caught up with anybody else on that. And then the other thing was, this is where the days are shorter. You naturally, as you get stronger and you get your legs under you, the days are getting longer. So you're just naturally increasing your miles as you get more
Sure.
daylight. And then, frankly, we hate the heat and bugs. I knew it was going to be some pretty cold nights and stuff. Hiking was fine for the most part, but we had a good sleep system, so everything worked out. We'd tested it all out and everything. So I just, other than just how hard it is when it's under freezing to get up and kind of do anything like cook and deal with water and stuff,
Yeah.
we pretty much, I think, adapted to it. I'm not saying we never got chilled a little bit at night. There were some nights that got down in the single digits or close to it. And, but it was, so to kind of just get out ahead of the crowd, get out ahead of the heat. We hoped it really that year. I don't know if you remember or not. We literally went from winter to, we had a big snowstorm first day of spring.
Right.
And lasted for a long time, and it never really had a spring. It just heated right up to summer in like a matter of a week or two. So we didn't really get ahead of the heat too much.
You also didn't get ahead of the bubble that much, either, did you? Because I read the early part of your journal, and you found the shelters were pretty full quite early on as well. So were you tending to stay in your tent most of the time, or did you stay in shelters as well?
Intending to stay in our tent. Which way she wanted to stay in the tent every night she could. I would only kind of veto that if I thought it was going to be raining all night or early the next morning, and then I didn't want to pack out a wet tent, so it just became a little easier. Yeah, it was pretty crowded, but the bubble was still a couple weeks behind us to start, and or at least a week or so, I guess. A lot of them, I think, maybe a following week was when the big kickoff was. And we managed to stay ahead of that crowd for the most part. A couple of times we were waiting for them to catch us, and I guess the bad weather had driven a lot of people off the trail that year early, or they never showed up, as early as they thought they were. So, yeah, it was crowded, a little bit in Georgia, but it started to thin out pretty good after that.
It's funny actually. I noticed this year because being an old guy and hiking with another old guy, Trigger, between us, we were 134 years old.
Wow.
And 133 years old, and so we were expected to be overtaken by the bubble.
Mm-hmm.
We never were, and we
Wow.
were shocked through New York, Connecticut, even New Hampshire. it's going to come soon, but they never actually seem to generally catch up with us. I mean, we've passed by loads of people, obviously, but really no real big bubble. So I love the ability to get some solitude out as well. And you probably did as well, didn't you?
Yeah, we certainly did. And then also staying in the tent gives you a little bit of solitude. And frankly, it's just, as you know, it's warmer in a tent, especially when you have two people in a tent than to sleep in a shelter, and less confusion. You get a packed shelter, like when you had to stay in the Smokies, and you got, a dozen to, a dozen and a half people all trying to get ready in a tight space. You're more likely to lose something or leave something behind. And Alicia actually grabbed the wrong hiking pole once. It was the same kind, except it wasn't a
easily done.
So I was like, we're about a few miles into it. I said, did you know you had two different hiking poles? He said, I do now. So we were able to get it back to the other person. Fortunately, they hiked out with two wrong poles, or one wrong pole as well, and theirs. And we knew somebody that was back there to say, hey, we have somebody's pole, and that identified it. We got to town and reconnected with them. So
I just noticed, actually, Alicia, when Darrell was talking, he referred to you as Which Way. Does he do that? Do the two of you speak to each other with your real names on the trail, or do you trail names?
No, when we were on the trail, he was always Next Step. And I think a lot of it was he was keeping that daily journal. And so I would do it like once a week, and I always signed it Which Way. And now that's just when we're hiking, that's usually what we call each other. So.
Oh, right. So I just kind of wondered that. And I know that on the second day, I believe it was, reading it, your journal, you took a nasty fall on your second day, Darrell, which does show actually how serendipitous this hike can be. You could just suddenly take a bad fall. You said you thought a little bit more pressure, you could have broken your femur, which is you must have been a really bad fall.
It was
how
bad.
How did that happen then?
Well, I was I was just feeling really good. It had been raining a little bit that morning, and then the rain kind of lifted, but the rocks were still wet. And there's not a lot of rocks there, but there's just kind of, there's some kind of not really boulders you have to climb over. They're not, there's maybe these big slabs that kind of slant down. And of course, Which Way is usually in front of me. She went around, but of course I was going top because I'm always like to test my stuff, And I found out that the soles of my hiking shoes were pretty slick because I started to slide down that thing, and then probably in an effort to catch myself, my right leg kind of bent under me, and Steve, it just literally, it was one of those things where I felt like that just 10 more pounds of pressure, my femur was a snap. In fact, I still have a knot right there where that happened.
Oh my gosh. Did that undermine your confidence a little? Because I know that when I took a bad tumble, I'd often spend the next hour or two really wary about what I was doing. And I, as I fell so many times, it was happening to me quite regularly.
I usually fell once a day at least. I usually, head over heels type stuff, but nice. it didn't really. It just reminded me I needed to be careful because I didn't want the journey to end on something like that. So I just had to kind of be a little more cautious, and I actually over time trained myself to hike a little differently. Where I learned that when you're kind of like skiing, when you get back on your skis, it kind of you get that drag, and you talk about skiing, get up over your skis. It's the same thing going down those big slick rocks. If you're kind of leaning forward, which is kind of the unnatural thing to do, you have less of a tendency for your feet to kind of want to slide out from under you. And all those times when the feet slides out from under you, as you always think, oh, this is it. And then you come back out on your backpack, so that's not so bad after all, but still you don't want to fall like that. But where I was trying to catch myself on that fall and keep myself from going backwards, that's what I ended up kind of hurting myself. And I kind of wallowed around in pain for a minute. And we just talked about taking a break right before that. And I said, after that, because it was Sunday, and we like to take communion on Sunday and kind of do a little pause in there to do a little worship. And I just said, do you want to stop and worship? She said, no, let's go a little further. Then I said, we're stopping here. Hey, I couldn't even get up. And then I didn't know what was going to happen. I was hobbled for a little while, and then I was able to hike, and it was definitely hurting for a few days, but it didn't deter us. We kept on schedule, and it wasn't until we got to our first town and I got out of the shower. I don't know if she noticed it or I noticed. She's like, your leg is completely bruised from your knee.
I bet
that side. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I did kind of hurt that a little bit. So,
but despite falling every day, or virtually every day, you said, but you were the one who actually got injured and had to get off the trail, weren't you, Alicia? What happened to you?
Yeah, and it's crazy because I'm the one who was super cautious. I mean, I only fell twice my whole time. I mean, because I was so
Wow.
cautious. Basically, I just had a previous injury several years ago to my back, and uh, I started off the very first day with a blister, and I think I started overcompensating, and then it was the knees, and then it was the hip, and then the back, and it was just the culmination of all of that. And I think it was just, every day, just the pounding, just tripping and that kind of thing. And so when I actually made it 1,000 miles, across the 1,000-mile mark, and that day, we found some trail angels, and they took me to a urgent care, and they took me straight to a physical therapist, and she's like, you're going to have to take this week and try to do some physical therapy. So I did the physical therapy, went back. And then the day that I went back for my last appointment, I was totally just locked up. And she's like, you're going to have to take off a month. And I was heartbroken,
Oh, yeah, I
absolutely
bet, yeah.
heartbroken. So there were tears.
Did you think that your hike was done at that point then, or did you
Well,
think you would get back on?
I really had hoped to. I'm like, fine, I'll just go home. I'll, do whatever they tell me to do for a month. I can come back and do that part later. And I did that. And I went back. Actually, I didn't make it a whole month. I went back about 3 weeks later, and tried to hike again. I met Darrell, I think it was in Massachusetts by then,
Right.
and tried to hike again. And as soon as I put my pack on, the spasms started back up, and I knew it was over. So.
Had you already discussed what would happen if one of you were to be injured? Did you say that the survivor would carry on? So, for example, had Darrell hurt himself on day 2,
Yeah.
had they had that 10 pounds of extra pressure, would would you have gone on, Alicia, by
Well, we've
yourself?
talked about this, and so we had talked about it before because, like you say, a lot of it is luck. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
people get injured. It's just it's the statistics. And so we'd already said if I get hurt, he will definitely continue. But I said honestly, it's going to depend on where we're at in the hike. And I think had I been near the end, I
Yeah.
absolutely would have gone on by myself. But on day 2, I probably did not have the confidence to do that.
Sure. So you were on your own then, Darrell. Firstly, did you consider going home with Alicia, or you'd made that decision already? You were going to carry on, and if you did, if you had made that decision, did you did the new dynamic alter your hike in any way at all?
Well, we didn't really have to take a long time to make the decision because we had already made it before we started the hike.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
We
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
already that far into it, and frankly, I just was continuing along with hopes that she would rejoin me, that she would heal and get back out there,
Right.
and it definitely altered the dynamic of my hike. For one thing, we had kind of talked about Massachusetts as a place, or Connecticut, to link back up, and I found myself starting to try to do a lot more miles to try to get to her quicker, type of thing. And we the one drawback I had of that simulated hike I talk about, we sat back and looked at it. We said, okay, it looks like it's going to take us, right at 6 months to finish this thing. And she kind of got that in her head. I wish I had never done that because I was fine to stay out there in October. But as much as she wanted to do it, she also had, we had some things in the fall that she wanted to get to.
Sure.
In her mind,
Sure.
Labor Day was the day. So by the time she got off, we were probably 2 or 3 days behind that kind of loose schedule to make it on time. And so I was going to try to get ahead as much as possible when she got back on the trail, so we could kind of, go back to doing shorter miles and have a little cushion there.
Yeah.
So it caused me to hike a little faster. I was not with the group anymore that we were with. As a matter of fact, we kind of, we had a group of about 8 of us at total, and they were all off the trail except for me at that point. And
Wow.
I don't know, I was kind of in no man's land. I literally in the eastern part of Pennsylvania for about a week. I did not see another northbound hiker. It was the weirdest thing. You talked about where's the bubble, and it was just like, I remember. I don't know if you got a chance to stay at the Rock and Sew hostel up there in Pennsylvania.
No.
It's a cool little hostel. But at any rate, couple's got a little garage set up out back, and it's really nice. But I was there it was a super rainy day. It rained all the night before, all that day. I mean, we're talking like, 1 or 2 inches of rain. And I came out about 1 and called this guy. He came and got me. And I was the only one there. It was like, where is everybody at? It was like really weird.
It's funny how these gaps between the various hikers appear suddenly, isn't it? You're caught in no man's land, aren't you? Really, because there's a bunch ahead of you and a bunch behind you, and just no one around you, and it's kind of nice in its own way. But I think the social side of the trail is so much better. So I was wondering whether people were not looking at you differently, but did people behave differently around you when you're a single hiker as opposed to a couple hiking together? Because you said you travel with a group of 6 other people, or was it 6 other people? Yeah. I mean, it's a different thing, isn't it? The whole thing's different for you.
It was completely different. I was still, determined, but, people, they asked me what was the hardest part. I always say it was hiking without her, because it was just our new normal. And I still enjoyed it. And I did end up eventually probably around New Jersey or so. I think actually coming out Lehigh Gap I ran into 2 or 3 people and then kind of loosely hiked with them for 500 miles or so. So I made some new friends out there, and I was catching up with some people who had passed us early on and kind of seeing them. And I eventually kind of settled in, and I got into a kind of our own little mini bubble with some folks. So that was good. And I'm still a social person. I don't sit around and wallow, in my, in the things that happened that didn't happen the way I had planned. So, I continued on. I'm pretty positive, but it definitely impacted me, psychologically, and just, and also physically, because I was probably hiking harder than I needed to.
I'm sure.
And it really, to talk about getting your trail legs. I don't know if this happened to you, Steve, but I never really felt like I got trail legs. Because you just hike longer and harder. I was, just as tired at the end of the day in July as I was back in February and March.
That's interesting. I remember the day virtually, and it happened for both hikes around Irwin, Tennessee. I suddenly realized I could get up mountains, and they were no longer an impediment. I mean, they were just in the way, and you had to get up them still. Yeah. But I could get up them instead of stopping every 5 yards. I'd sometimes stop every 100 yards and then hardly stop at all. So I do definitely feel trail legs from me was something I got. And you talked about having a schedule. I think having too much of a schedule ahead of you and saying you want to be 160 miles down the trail in a week and a half's time, or whatever that number is, does put more pressure upon you than you necessarily need to do, doesn't it? But then you gave yourself that again because Alicia was coming back right at the end. So did you do the 100-mile wilderness with the anticipation of meeting her at Abel Bridge, or how did that work out?
Absolutely. I mean, that was on my mind. And I was back to kind of scripted again. We got to that point because she was flying in. So I knew exactly the day she was coming. So I could kind of script out my hike through the 100-mile wilderness, more or less. And I tell you, if you read the journal the last few days, I got a hold of her. The signal was really bad. And I was in my last day of the 100-mile wilderness, I think. I was going to actually spend one more night there, and she was starting to fly into Boston. I talked to her at the airport from where she was flying out of Louisville, and she sounded distraught. I mean, it took me a little while to get a hold of her that morning. I said, "What's going on?" She said, "I threw my back out." I can't remember.
Oh my gosh,
it was terrible.
Like, you got to be kidding me! And I was ready. I don't want to say quit, but I was done. I was like, you got to be kidding me. I was so mad at the trail, and I don't know why, it was just, I was like, I don't want to go up Katahdin without you. And so I ended up hiking all the way out to Abel Bridge that day and found a Yogi to ride into town, and ended up getting a hotel and met her when she came in that night. And I said, well, let the flight attendant know, you need some ice, start icing it down and all that, and take some ibuprofen. And by the time she got there, she felt a little better. So we did that. The next day we did a hike through Baxter State Park, right up to the point where you're going up, to Katahdin. And she said, I feel pretty good. So we went up the next day, and she did really good. But even then it was still really weird because, obviously the hike up was a lot of fun, and I was enjoying that. And then I got there, and then we got to the top, and it was like, there's this huge crowd of people. And it was on a Monday because I kind of intentionally I was trying to avoid a weekend to get there, but they were mainly just day hikers and stuff. And I don't know what I was thinking it was going to be like up there, but all I could think about, okay, let's get this picture, do this thing. and I got to get you off the mountain because, I knew that this was a down I was worried about. And we actually hiked down the backside, which was about the same distance, but in my thinking it was not going to be as steep of a descent, in some places more gradual, but that was a tough hike down that backside. I don't know if you did that or not. But,
did you come down? Was it the A-Bowl Trail you came down? That's the one that some people did do.
Trail. This was the one that came really on the kind of the north. When you get at the top, you kind of head off to the west a little bit, and then you turn north, and then come around completely the other side. It wasn't the Knife's Edge. I can't remember the name of the trail.
No, right. Because I thought it was an A-Bowl Trail. The Hunt Trail was the one we went up, and we came straight down. Well, straight down. It took us longer to get down than it did to get up. It took us ages. Yeah, it was tough. So that's interesting. So you summited together, and Alicia, with your back hurting and so on, did it feel like you were starting over again physically? Because you hadn't hiked for some time, had you?
That was quite a hike to come back to, that's for sure. But just the whole rock scramble and that kind of thing, that was definitely. But I loved it. I mean, it was just so far out of my comfort zone. It was just like, I cannot believe I'm doing this, and especially after not having hiked for a good several months.
I bet. Yeah, I bet.
But yeah, it was definitely like starting over.
But I would imagine, though, your emotions must have been very different when you finished as well, because for Darrell, it was the end of your journey.
Exactly.
But for you, it really wasn't, Alicia. Did you get joy, obviously, from seeing Darrell achieve his goal? But did you feel disappointed for yourself?
I was very disappointed. I mean, I was very happy for him. I was actually crying for him. I think I was more emotional than he was. But I was beyond disappointed. I just felt like I let myself down, and our family was all into it, our kids and, all the family. And I just wanted to be able to finish. It was just very disappointing.
Chimney Pond Trail. We hiked out Roaring Brook campground. But
the good news, though, Alicia, is you do have a plan, don't you?
Yes.
And you are going to finish it. Are you going to finish it in over sections now, or how's that going to work out?
Yes, our plan now is we'll take 100 miles a year. That's what our vacation allows us to do. So we'll go 100 miles, and we just finished doing a section this year.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, we just finished Bears Den Hostel to Caledonia State Park. And so about 100 miles a year. And then I'm hoping by the time we get to New Hampshire, Maine, that we can take a big chunk of time and just go do that all at once, so I can, start building my legs and not have to just go straight to the whites. So
yeah, I would start it halfway through Vermont if I were you.
Exactly.
That's what you meant to say.
Exactly. But I would like to. My goal is to finish in 7 years. I'll turn 60 in 7 years, and I would love to finish before I'm 60. So.
Would either of you ever be crazy enough to do what I did and go again?
Well, he's going 1.5 times, so that's close.
I know. That's good. Yeah, it's good.
It would be tempting to finish another section, down back to Georgia from Harper's Ferry. But, there's only so much time in life, Stephen. I want to spend most of it with Whichway here. So I would do it again, as she said. And there might be a couple of close friends that they said they really wanted to do it. I would consider it. But I think there's just so many more trails out there that I think we want to probably go and do. We were just talking about the Camino Trail in Spain, and
that's great
out there and doing that one. And there's some other ones that maybe are not quite that same distance. But shoot, I would do a Triple Crown if she was into it. But I think it was tough though. I mean, it was really as hard as I knew it was going to be. It beat me down more than I thought it would. And it actually probably wasn't until I got off the trail, because I thought I was going to immediately recover. And I actually went downhill for about a month after I got off, when I took those hiking shoes off and I was getting plantar fasciitis and I think my knee, my back and everything. I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. But I eventually recovered and good hiking shape now. Well, maybe not shape, but condition anyway. So
it is debilitating. There's no question about it. You put yourself through something, but one of you used the word, I think it was you, Alicia, used the word accomplishment. It is a real accomplishment to finish it. I think it's a real accomplishment to do 1,000 miles or even 500 miles. None of this is easy. And not that it's a brave thing to do. It's just one of those things that you want to do. So when you've finished it, or you've finished a large chunk of it, it is a real accomplishment. I think it's something to take pride of and joy out of. For me, it's something I look back on the first time very fondly and the second time very fondly, and both hikes were entirely different. By the way, you mentioned you flew in from Louisville?
Yes.
you from? Is that where you're from?
I'm from Kentucky, yes.
All right, because that's where Trigger was from, Louisville, and he taught me how to say Louisville.
That's right. He taught you to say it the correct way.
That's cool. Well, look, it's been lovely to speak to you guys. I'm so glad you reached out, and I'm so pleased also that you're going to finish it, Alicia. And that was one of the questions I really wanted to know. You know, how did you feel at the finish? And it must have been disappointing, but you're going to get that joy when you do finish it next time.
Absolutely.
Hey, and Steve, and I'm really looking forward to being with her in the second part and kind of just seeing, what's that's like hiking kind of together and through our eyes instead of just my eyes. And I just want to say on that accomplishment, that's the beauty of the AT, whether you finish it over the years or all at once. As you know, there's those kind of mini accomplishments along the way. I mean, it's like a huge goal broken up a lot of mini goals, and those are really cool moments. And I just like to say, whether you're hiking a through hike or a section hike, the Appalachian Trail rewards those who persevere. So if you can just persevere through whatever it is you're doing, you're going to get that moment, on the trail. It's just going to give it back, 100-fold.
Except for Pennsylvania, of course. No, I'm joking. So I shouldn't say things like that. No, I did actually enjoy it. But anyway, all right. Well, look, lovely to talk to you guys. And hopefully you'll let us know when you go back out there and when you get near the end.
Absolutely. Great to meet you.
All right.
Thanks for having
me
on. Good luck to you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
No worries. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
I thought their different perspectives, informed separately by their different experience on the trail, was so interesting. While Alicia was delighted for Darrell that he'd finished, she felt so let down herself. I think it's important to recognise the achievement of 1,000 miles on the trail, or 500 miles, or 250, or just 20 miles. While we all want to get to the end, and some of us have been lucky to have done just that, not getting to the end should never be regarded as a failure. I just hope that those who may not have got to the end this year aren't put off, and that they're going to be back for some more sometime in the future. Now we have another couple who have finished the trail, and they finished the Camino last year. The Seymours were looking for a way to give back to the AT, and they decided upon, well, this. Let's hear from Jen and Greg, or Chica and Sunsets. Well, we've got a couple of old friends of the show who were on the show before, Chica and Sunsets, which is Jen and Greg Seymour. Hi, guys. How are you?
Hey.
Hey, Mighty Blue.
I love being called that. No, nobody in real life calls me that, which is great. Now, I know that the two of you did the AT a couple of years ago and that you did the Camino last year, just before I did. But you've now got a project going that would absolutely terrify me. You're going into the world of trail hostels. What was the thinking behind that?
It was kind of a running joke along our AT through hike. We would kind of poke fun at some of the hostel stays that we had and try to build our worst case hostel using examples from hostels that we had. So, something like a bathroom to hiker ratio of 1 to 15, something.
Nice.
So as the hike progressed, we started kicking around the idea, okay, what's next for us? And we started thinking seriously about running a hostel. We knew it was a difficult task, but we started coming up with our ideal hostel that used some of those negatives.
So what is your ideal hostel then? What is it? What does it look like to you?
Well, for starters, we're not going to have any bunk beds.
Oh.
And we're going to have a very small hostel. So we're only going to have 4 beds, and they'll be in 2 rooms. So 2 rooms with 2 beds each. No bunk beds. They'll have the whole downstairs apartment for the hikers. There'll be a bathroom. There's a kitchen, a living area. There'll be a washer and dryer. They can do their own laundry, and I'll prepare breakfast in the morning. So we kind of framed it around more like a B&B, or a bed and breakfast, than a true hiker trashy hostel, like with 1 room with 15 bunk beds in it. That wasn't our cup of tea when we did our through hike. So
you basically designed the hostel when you were on the trail that you would have hated, the composite bad thing you would hate, and you've done the exact opposite of that. You've done the one you actually would have liked to have stayed in most of the time.
Exactly. And we definitely did have some really nice hostel stays on the AT as well. But like Greg said, we were just kind of thinking of the next thing we wanted to do with our lives. And the more we got into our through hike, we just loved it so much. We loved the hiker community. We loved the people we met. And we thought, what better way to stay involved with each current hiker season than to have a hostel? We get to meet all these people. We get to give back to them in a way. So,
Cool.
yeah.
You never considered going back to Spain and doing a Camino Albergue then?
No, no, a foreign country, that would be a lot harder.
And so instead of being on the plains of Spain, you are actually, you settled on Franklin. Was that, did you live there already, or did you see a place in the market you thought Franklin was a good spot?
No, well, when we were transitioning, we lived in Costa Rica for almost 4 years, and when we were transitioning back to the U.S., we were thinking about, okay, where are we going to live? And Franklin was this was even before we were thinking about hiking the AT. We liked Franklin because it was mountainous. It was a smaller town. It had good weather, not too hot summers, not too cold winters. And in close proximity to the Smoky Mountains, Asheville, and things like that. So when we did our through hike, we had friends who had just moved here who put us up for a couple nights because we were in the middle of a snowstorm, and we really came to enjoy the town. And so when we started deciding on moving somewhere permanently, Franklin was high on the list.
I mean, there are more and more couples going on the trail. I've noticed this year, funny enough, when I was out there were, and I think hiking as a couple must be quite difficult, generally, because you're spending 24/7 with each other, which most human beings aren't 24/7 with somebody else, are they? So did you bring so the experiences you had on the trail, is this really for couples generally? Because it was 2 beds in one room and 2 beds in another, and it may well work out like that quite often, mightn't it?
No, it's not specifically for couples. It might work out well that way, sure, with the two beds in each bedroom, but we weren't focused on couples.
No, we're more focused on fewer hikers in the living space.
Yeah, so just keeping it small, and plus we have a small car, so we can only handle 4 hikers.
Well, there is that. That was the other thing I was going to ask you. The various other things you're doing. You said you're going to do the breakfast, because I went to a new hostel this year. I'm not going to say who it was, but it was a new hostel, and they were just getting started, and they'd open up the doors way too early. They hadn't worked out their kinks. I mean, there are things that will go wrong, because obviously life does go wrong always. Have you worked out your processes, when you do this stuff? Because you really, with just 4, it should be a lot easier. But these people really hadn't worked out what they were prepared to do and what they were going to charge for different lifts back to the trail. Have you worked all that out so you know when you get asked the question what the answer is going to be?
We have a framework for sure, and I think it'll be kind of learn as we go. The first year will be very interesting, and a bit of a learning curve. But you're right, dealing with only 4 hikers, it's going to be pretty basic. We pick up at the trailhead. There's one main trailhead for Franklin, which is Winding Stair Gap. There's 2 other ones that are a little bit further, but we'll focus on Winding Stair Gap. We'll pick them up. We'll get them here, let them take a shower, get cleaned up, take them in town. We're just a mile outside of downtown. Right. Take them in town, let them have a beer at the Lazy Hiker, resupply at the grocery store right across the street, pick them back up, and then, have breakfast at like 7 o'clock, 7:30.
Mm-hmm. And I think, we're pretty good at doing research, and we've had some time. We talked about it a lot while we were doing our through hike. So that was something that kept us going when we were hiking. And we do research really well, like before we moved to Costa Rica. And then obviously before we hiked the AT, we did a lot of research. So I feel like we're pretty prepared.
I believe so.
I mean, sure, there's things that are going to happen or go wrong or come up.
Yeah. So are you in gut hooks for this year already, for next year already? Or are you actually open yet? That's not really the question.
In February, they'll put us in. We had a little snafu where we were working on our ad for gut hooks, and she responded, "Okay, you guys are live." And we're like, no, we're not.
No, we're not open yet.
Oh dear. So is there an actual opening date when you tend to start?
I think just February 15th.
15th, yeah. But
All
we're
right,
doing gut hooks and AWOL. So
because the season does seem to be starting early, doesn't it? Earlier and earlier.
We're already starting to follow people who are announcing for an early February start, and we're just 110 miles into the trail, so it's only takes a week and a half to get here. So
what about your hiking? Because once you commit yourself to this, it's quite not so much onerous, but it's certainly a lot to do, and running a place 7 days a week. Are you going to be hiking, or are you expect ready for the restrictiveness of having a hostel when it comes to your own hiking?
Well, one of the great things about a hostel that's dedicated to hikers, specifically on the Appalachian Trail, is their seasons. So our plan is, and I think the first year we're just going to see kind of what the flow of hikers is. But the next year we're thinking about hiking the Colorado Trail. So that would take us out for 6 weeks. But we'll do that, late July when there's no
There's not
hikers.
too many hikers, and we might have someone come and stay here and take care of those hikers at that time. But it should be the real low hiker season, between the bubbles. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reason I heard about it obviously was on Facebook and so on. Have you got quite a good reception from the hiking community so far? Have you got any bookings yet?
we
Yes.
do have some bookings, but just so
Awesome.
people know, we are not taking reservations in advance. The only bookings we have are people who have donated some money to us to help us. We had a little campaign we ran, and people who donated some money at that time were able to reserve them and book them. But for the normal hikers who come through, we're asking them to just call one day ahead of when they'll be here.
Yeah,
All
because having only four spots, and with if you schedule too many days out, your schedule's going to change, and we don't want to book someone and then have it not come through.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, do you have a website yet? Are you going to have a website, or is that up and running so people can see it?
We do have a website, chicaandsunsets.com. We do need
Cool.
we need to work on a specific tab for the hostel, though. That's on our to-do list before we
All right.
open. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, there's nothing specific on the hostel. It's just our normal blog post right now.
Right. So when they want to book, they'll have the phone number in gut hooks at the time. If you want to give it out now, you can, but if you probably don't want to, because you don't want people trying to book anyway. But so be on chicaandsunsets.com, and they can book through there, and they can email you, I presume, at some stage for bookings.
You can email. I don't have the email. I can't remember.
Well, you can do Chica at chicaandsunsets.com or sunsets at chicaandsunsets.com. Either one of those work.
Cool. Well, look, I wish you well. I'm sure you're going to do great, because I know you're such a popular couple in the community anyway. So I'm going to go up to trail days this year. I might be trying to pass somewhere through near there, so I might look in and see how you guys are.
Yeah,
perhaps we can have another conversation.
We'll be at trail days too, so we can meet you.
Cool. All right then. Well, lovely to talk to you guys. Take it easy, okay? And really enjoy it next year. and see if you go to the year later as well.
Okay. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Good luck to the two of them. I admire them, and I'm pretty sure that is something I could never, ever do. So good on them. I hope that they knock it out of the park. Now, this review. It's from Stu G XYZ with a heading that reads, "Love the stories, but quick thought. Do you have to be crazy to go?" Stu G XYZ goes on, "Loving the stories, but a quick thought was all the people you have interviewed so far are just divorced or about to get divorced, have PTSD, or are getting over abuse. These are interesting stories to hear, but if I do the trail, I hope there are some people who are not in an unstable emotional state. Or is this a big cause for people who do this type of adventure?" Well, Stu G XYZ, well, I know that I got divorced after my hike this year, and there are certain people out there with breakups, emotional issues, and yes, probably PTSD. Yet the trail is a really accurate reflection of society. You have these people in all walks of life. But if you're looking for a kinder, more caring, better bunch of people than those you're going to meet on the Appalachian Trail, you'd have to go a long, long way, and then you may still never meet them. Yes, of course, there are people who are not in an unstable emotional state, as you say, and you'll love those too. If you've listened to my shows, it is no coincidence that virtually everybody cites the people you meet as the very best part of the Appalachian Trail. So get out there and dive into humanity. You will never regret it, and I promise you that. Finally, today we've reached Chapter 10 of Hiking Thru, where again Paul shares his visceral story with us, heading up and over Roan Mountain. I'll see you next time. Chapter 10. Words Have Meaning. Morning in Irwin, Tennessee, saw 10 of us hikers crowded around a lunch counter in the back of a little grocery store. The Trail Grapevine had recommended breakfast here. Several elderly ladies took our orders and prepared our food right in front of us. There were only a few stools, so some in the group stood. It was a scene Norman Rockwell might have painted.
We could have been 10 stockbrokers or lawyers or any other group of men meeting for breakfast anywhere in America on that Friday morning in April, but we were 10 through hikers discussing equipment, shelters and the upcoming terrain. No deadlines, no big deals to hammer out, just 10 hikers, each with his own personal agenda. Motormouth was talking constantly, but no one paid much attention to anything he said. His 2 hiker buddies were conspicuously absent. The shuttle took us back to our hostel and we packed up, getting a very late start on our day. I enjoyed these town stops. The amenities and kindnesses rejuvenated both body and spirit. Several miles down the trail, we met one of Motormouth's friends taking a break at the Curly Maple Gap shelter. "Hey, what happened to you guys this morning?" I asked. "I saw Motormouth at breakfast, but you two were missing." "Well, it's like this," he began in his southern drawl. "The 3 of us shared one room last night. Motormouth was talking all night long, and my friend attempted to drown out the noise by drinking. The more Motormouth talked, the more my friend drank. He must have had 10 or 12 beers. Didn't stop the talking, but at least he wasn't in any shape to listen. Wasn't in any shape to hike today either." He added that Motormouth was taking a bus back home for a family function today. "So that means we won't have to listen to him any more?" I had high hopes. "Nope, you're not quite that lucky. He's estimating where we'll be in several days, and he'll yellow blaze his way back to meet us." We did not start hiking until almost noon that day and decided to push on until dark. The afternoon included several big uphill climbs, a rest to enjoy the beautiful vista from a bald called Beauty Spot, and the conquest of Unaka Mountain. These climbs soon drained any strength I had regained during the town stop in Irwin. At 7:30 we pitched our tents at Cherry Gap Shelter. I lost no time in filtering my water, cooking a meal and sliding into my sleeping bag. I wanted as much rest as possible, knowing that the next day would be our biggest climb until we reached Mount Washington in New Hampshire. Roan Mountain rises over 6,000 feet, and we had heard much about the difficulty of summiting this mountain. Roan Mountain exceeded its reputation. 2 peaks of the mountain rise to the west, and 3 grassy balds stretch over 7 miles on the east. Carver's Gap sits between these 2 parts of the mountain. We climbed for several endless hours, as I later wrote in my journal. This was a climb, not just a casual uphill walk. I struggled over rocks, grabbing tree roots on the steep trail to pull myself upward, my lungs protesting and aching for a rest. I talked to my body, trying to push it upward. "Okay, leg, step onto that mass of roots. Now, other leg, get yourself up over that rock. Come on, body, get up there with the feet." The climb was harder than anything I'd imagined in my daydreams of the AT, and the 35 pounds on my back seemed to have doubled its weight, conspiring with the mountain to keep me from making the summit. At the top, I doubled over in pain and exhaustion. A brief rest, then onward. But a short distance later, the trail abruptly turned upward again. "What's this?" I asked Sailor in dismay, looking up the almost vertical path. "I thought we just hiked over Roan Mountain." He consulted his hiker handbook and gave us the bad news. We had just crossed Beartown Mountain and still had close to 1.5 miles to the summit of Roan. And before the summit we must cross the 2 humps of Roan High Bluff and Roan High Knob until we would finally reach the high point of 6,285 feet. When at last we crossed Roan High Knob, our hopes for rest were frustrated yet again. We located a shelter, but it was filling up fast. Because the dense forest crowded closely, there were very few tent spots outside. We debated. A few more miles would take us through Carver's Gap and onto one of the balds. Jane Bald was not as dramatic as Max Patch, but it would certainly be interesting to camp on one of those open grassy areas. We moved on. In Carver's Gap, at a road crossing, we stopped for a moment at a parking lot that straddled the state line. Roan Mountain had completely drained our energy and we had drained our water supply. We'd been hiking for 11 hours and still had a mile to go. A car pulled up. "Are you guys through hikers?" We assured the driver that our intent was to become through hikers. "Great. I come out here one day each year to do trail magic. I've been here several hours and you're the first through hikers I've met. I was almost ready to give up and head home. I've got bananas, tortilla chips and blueberry turnovers," he said, starting to unpack the goodies. Our new friend had hiked half of the trail one year but could not finish. Someday he wanted to complete the hike, but until then he kept in touch with the trail and its magic by meeting and feeding through hikers. We offered to wait for him if he wanted to go home, get his pack and join us. All 3 of us knew those some days seldom arrive. We devoured most of his food, saving only a few bananas for breakfast the next day. Refreshed, we crossed the road and the mile to Jane Bald melted away quickly. The sun was disappearing over Roan Mountain as we set up camp in the waning light. The balds created a world different from the steep forested mountains. Clear of trees, covered mostly with grasses and wildflowers, the rounded knobs gave splendid views in every direction, and we rolled over them with delight. The trail magic bananas at breakfast added to our energy. We climbed Little Hump Mountain and then Hump Mountain. Hump Junior was only 100 feet shorter than Hump Senior, so both required some of that extra banana energy. Since leaving Irwin, our climbing skills and endurance had been tested and stretched, and we were ready for a shorter, easier day. According to our hiker handbook, we would cross US Route 19 in the afternoon. From there, we could follow the highway just a short distance east of the Mountain Harbour Bed and Breakfast, recommended to us by several hikers. Rumour had it that we might also get a home-cooked meal. The morning's hike brought more trail magic. Tacked to the railing of a wooden footbridge, a handwritten note told us, "Trail magic in creek. Please take trash out." Attached to the note was a bag filled with Hostess Twinkies, and in the clear mountain stream lay a chilled six-pack of Coca-Cola. With renewed vigour from the sugar buzz, we soon emerged from the woods and headed down the road to Mountain Harbour. The B&B was in a beautiful house with a long porch and rock gardens, set in a clearing crisscrossed by a stream and split-rail fences. The hiker hostel was in the barn. Lest you make incorrect assumptions about the hospitality here, let me add that the upper level of the barn had been designed as a hiker cabin, complete with a wood-burning stove, a kitchen area, modern bathroom fixtures and a hot shower. It was both comfortable and comforting. Rain had started again, and we were happy to be under a roof. In the evening, we walked to the main house where our hosts served us a huge meal of barbecue ribs and chicken. They treated us like family, and I realised that I had indeed become part of a family that kept growing larger as I travelled north. Rain on the tin roof lulled me to sleep that night. On the floor below me were 3 horses and a goat. We were sleeping in the stable. There was no baby Jesus, but we were certainly 3 wise men. The rain was still coming down when we awoke, adding to the discomfort of a cold mountain morning. We left our cosy cabin in the barn reluctantly and lingered over a hot, satisfying breakfast at the main house. But finally we could delay no longer, and off we went, into the wind and rain. At least the terrain was easier that day, in the 3,300 to 3,600 foot range, with no dramatic changes in elevation. Late in the afternoon we arrived at Moreland Gap Shelter and stopped to debate staying there or pushing on another mile and camping in the woods. We hiked on. However, the rain began again and we could find no suitable campsite. Constant thunder and lightning around us suggested we were not 3 wise men after all. Finally, in desperation, we set up our tents in a lane running through a field, a path probably used by a farmer to move farm equipment from one field to another. We hoped the weather was bad enough to keep him and his equipment inside that night. The temperature fell during the night, and so did the rain. When I tried to open my tent in the morning, I no longer had a tent flap, but a hatch. I pushed open the rigid piece of canvas and realised that Big Agnes had frozen into an igloo, completely coated with a layer of ice. I pounded the igloo with a stick, trying to remove as much ice as possible, then bent the material enough so that I could shove it into my pack. We were almost as frozen as our tents and had only one thing on our minds: find a warm place to thaw out. Less than 4 miles away was Dennis Cove Road and the Kincora Hiking Hostel, where we stopped to defrost. An hour passed quickly while we visited with other hikers, de-iced our tents and warmed our bodies. Another easy mile brought us to Laurel Fork Gorge, where a flight of rock steps took us down the side of the gorge to the base of a waterfall, a lovely spot with a pool perfect for taking a dip, if the temperature had been 80 degrees higher. Then the trail followed the river, squeezing between the river and the tall rocky wall of the gorge, now and then crossing wooden footbridges to the opposite side. A climb out of the gorge was much steeper than we expected. A sign told us we were in the Pond Mountain Wilderness, part of the Cherokee National Forest. None of us had heard of this climb, and with no forewarning, we were ambushed by its difficulty. Shouldn't a mountain called Pond be an easy climb? By mid-afternoon we had hiked close to 14 miles and were standing at another road crossing. To our left, on US 321, was Hampton, Tennessee, home to the Braemar Castle Hostel. The hostel owner ran a grocery store and old-time hardware across the street, and we knew a restaurant was also nearby. Record cold was in the forecast, and we did not wish to repeat the previous night's misery, so we decided to hitchhike to town 2 miles away. No one picked us up, so we walked the entire distance to Hampton. The Braemar Castle Hostel is a 50-room office building constructed by the Pittsburgh Lumber Company in the early 1900s. The exterior of the all-wood structure was enhanced by Riverstone in the 1930s, giving it the appearance of a castle. Now it's a hiker hostel. We went from a barn to a castle in 2 days. Sailor, Marathon Man and I were the only guests that night, and as we walked up several flights of wooden steps, they groaned and creaked to welcome. No alarm system was needed here. Those wooden steps would announce any intruders long before they reached our room. During the night, the temperature did drop to record lows, but we were warm and dry in our castle, reassured that we 3 wise men could still occasionally make good choices. The next morning, the hostel owner shuttled us back to Shook Branch picnic area, where we had left the trail the previous day. The owner of the Kincora hostel, where we had thawed the day before, was dropping off slack packers at the same spot. As we hiked away, the 2 hostel owners were leaning against the back of the pickup, engaged in laughter and friendly banter. Competitors perhaps, but partners in their love of nature and the trail. 2 more good people in my ever-growing list of trail friends. We followed the shoreline of Lake Watauga. The town of Old Butler lay somewhere nearby, a town steeped in history. Many early pioneer families settled and farmed here. Native Americans were peaceful neighbours. Daniel Boone even spent time in Old Butler. I enjoy early American history, and I thought perhaps I should visit this historic town while I was in the neighbourhood. How do you find Old Butler? Jump in a boat, go to the middle of the lake, then go straight down several hundred feet. Yes, another government-created reservoir, this one an earthen dam creating a lake covering 6,430 acres. The victims this time were the Watauga and the Elk Rivers and historic Old Butler itself. Over 700 homes in Old Butler were flooded to create the lake. I wonder how the displaced families felt flood control was working for them. The AT crosses over the top of the large earthen embankment, 1,000 feet long. Surrounding mountains still show scars where dirt was gouged from their slopes to create the stopper. As I crossed the dirt wall holding back the huge man-made puddle, I tried to ignore the 10 square miles of water pushing at the soil and silt under my feet. Safely across, we tackled a 2,000-foot climb over Iron Mountain. The day was filled with wildflowers and green fields, a perfect springtime hike. We made camp that night beside a little spring on a small uphill grade. 22 miles made a good day, but the evening was bittersweet. This would be our last night with Marathon Man. Tomorrow we would reach Damascus, Virginia, where he planned to end his hike and return home. We would be losing our leader, a singer of songs who had introduced us to the birds along the trail. His hiking leadership had pushed me quickly into shape. He loved books as much as I did, and his agile intellect had sharpened mine as we bounced ideas back and forth. Relaxing alone in my tent, I thought about the month I had spent on the trail. I'd seen and done so much, everything far removed from my previous life. I had learned to accept the friendship of others quite different from myself, and I was beginning to be happy being me, even with all my shortcomings. Every day it seemed that God revealed more of himself to me. Perhaps it was because I wanted to hear. Several days before I had been following a young man on the trail. When I was within speaking distance, I attempted a conversation with him, but was ignored. I realised he had earbuds in and was focused on his music. Everywhere these days, people are plugging their ears and depriving themselves of good conversation. That earpiece is like putting up a Do Not Disturb sign. This ear-plugged hiker shut out not only all conversation with fellow humans, but also all the sounds of nature. He could not hear the singing birds or the whispering pines. Apparently, he could not even hear approaching thunder. The ear-plugged young man had a hiking partner who was a short distance ahead of him. Thunder had been rumbling around us, and raindrops started to fall as we crossed a road. The unplugged hiker had heard the warning rumbles. Catching sight of a country church down the road, he dashed to the refuge of its little porch. But the other hiker marched on, head down, watching the trail and concentrating only on his music. His friend stood on that dry porch, calling, but the hiker never saw his friend leave the trail and certainly did not hear his name called out. He was soaked by the rain and separated from his partner. I wonder how far he walked before he realised he was alone. Though I watched with amusement as this little scene played out, I felt an inner nudge that said, "That's you, you know." And I got it. I saw myself in church on Sunday mornings, hoping to hear from God, but letting so many worries and distractions clog my mind that I never could hear him, even when he stood there calling my name. I saw the times I had knelt for a quick prayer at night and then immediately tumbled into sleep. How could God talk to a sleeping person? Now I had finally removed everything plugging my ears and my head, and I felt willing and able to listen to God. Words have meanings. We often heard this maxim from Sailor, and since I had lots of time to think as I hiked, those 3 words rattled around in my head daily and took on real meaning for me. Our words hold great power. That pointed little bit of membrane in our mouths that gives voice to our hearts can energise or soothe or destroy. As I hiked, I had an amazing number of conversations about the loss of a loved one. Still, it would not have surprised me. After all, it was my reason for being on the trail, and every family, nationality, creed and colour shares the experience of death. One of those conversations was with a hiker who was a young man when his father died. We spoke about grief and regrets and what we wished we could do differently. He told me his story. On the night his father unexpectedly passed away, they had an angry shouting match. The son fired some very harsh words at his dad. Later that evening, the father suffered a massive heart attack and died. His son carried painful regrets for his words, and the argument was still vivid many years later. He sadly told me that he could not erase those angry words from his mind. We never know which conversation with our spouse or children will be our last. Once spoken, words have the power to linger forever. "I hate you," screams a wife, or "I never wanted you," says a husband. Words can be cutting and cruel, rejecting and crushing. Words do have meaning. They can and do determine our destiny. Our sons and daughters are listening to our words. How they interpret our words, our tone, our intent, will play a large role in shaping their own characters. Our words affect our children's destinies too. What if we choose our words more thoughtfully? I make no claims to being husband of the year. I was never even in the running. Realistically, on the husband scale, I was probably average. My school report cards sometimes came back with the teacher's note, "does not live up to full potential." And that was probably a fair assessment of my husband's skills too. Yes, my grief included regrets, and some of those regrets might have distressed me for a lifetime if I had not listened to a voice inside me. My conversation with the hiker haunted by his last words to his father put me back in Mary's hospital room. She had been admitted to the hospital in an extremely weakened state, and I had spent the evening with her. Leaving, I went dashing through the rain to the parking garage. Before I reached my car, a voice inside me spoke up, firm and clear. "Paul, go back up to her room and say it." I knew exactly what I needed to do. Back through the rain and up to her room I went, and quietly called her name. "Paul, what are you doing back here?" Her weak voice was almost a whisper. I took both frail hands in mine and, with tears spilling, asked my wife's forgiveness for all the times she needed my help, all the times she needed me, but I wasn't available. My one goal in life was to be wealthy, and in my pursuit of that goal, I had too often ignored what my wife needed from me. "Forgive me for all the times I was such a thoughtless husband," I said. Her words came like a balm for my pain. "Yes, I will forgive you. And I also need forgiveness for not always being the wife I could have been. You'll forgive me?" Any burdens we carried were gone. I left for home, and the last words I heard that night were, "Good night, dear. I love you." Forgiveness and love, words that can soothe and heal a troubled soul. You, my reader, might also have some powerful words that need to be spoken. Don't put it off. You may have less time than you realize. Take it from someone with experience. Words do have meaning.